I was fascinated to get to know more about Mike. When we first interviewed him, he has an extremely interesting background, very, very diverse. Please welcome Mike Tarka.
And a grueling interview it was. She and Ben called, and they weren't too sure about me, and I guess it's okay for me to admit today I wasn't too sure about them either, so maybe that's okay.
That's fair.
I want to tell you that as of halfway through last night's party, I had really come to the conclusion, Chase is right, we go to a lot of these things, as you might imagine, and you get an opportunity to compare one state's LP affiliate to another, and I had come to the conclusion halfway through the party last night that you guys were fairly normal people. That's all gone now. You people are insane, which I think is okay. I do look forward to making phone calls for you, John, and I look forward to Chase's phone calls as well, and I look forward to making phone calls for Chase and him making phone calls for me. Now that I know this is a thing, and we're going to start auctioning these off. Jules had actually asked me to auction off a hat, but now I'm going to keep the damn hat now that I know I'm going to be making phone calls for a couple of hours for some county I never heard of in Iowa. So that's pretty exciting stuff. I don't see Mr. You're standing in the back. I actually have had a couple of conversations with people around the state already. By that I mean around the room. In favor of changing your name, Mr. Stewart, to major party status, which I think would be a good thing for the ballot. But I also, and that was the origination of the conversation, of course, is that how cool would it be to have major party status, something you could actually vote for right there on the ballot. But how cool would it be if we could just run around calling you Major from now on? And by the way, being called Major Status is not a bad moniker. Just, hi, I'm Major Status. I mean, it's kind of cool. But the best part would be that your middle name from now on would literally be Party, which I think is kind of cool in some weird way. And I totally apologize to your family if it already is, and I've just accepted it. Look, you all can hear me okay in the back? I wasn't sure if this thing was working because Greg put it together and I wasn't too sure about him either. That's actually too bad. I'm probably going to say a couple things that piss you off. Of all the things that don't need to be said today, the following I think is the most prominent, the most useless, and the most obvious. And that is, I am not your charm and good looks candidate, okay? You've got your choice of those. If I say anything today that makes you feel good inside and makes you comfortable, we are not communicating effectively. That's not supposed to be a laugh line, but I appreciate that. Look, it turns out to be true since the last time I was in Iowa, which arguably was a little while ago, but it turns out to be true a couple of things that I think are worth reviewing. It turns out to be true that your government took money from you and from your neighbors, from other people around Iowa and other people around the United States, forcibly, by the way, mixed it with a lot of money from people, that was taken from them, also forcibly by other governments around the world. It was mixed and run through a shell corporation offshore, the name of which you don't know. And it was used to invest in a laboratory in China, in the city of Wuhan. Anybody visit Wuhan, by the way? I've actually been there and I'm okay. So that's good news. The investment was made without your knowledge. Dr. Fauci, of course, says it was not used for gain-of-function research, and Senator Rand says it was. But one thing that we do know is that money being fungible, especially fiat money being fungible, the money certainly was used to advance the cause of gain-of-function research. It was used to create a virus not otherwise found in nature, and it was released into the public. Please, God, let us find out that it was by mistake. Your government decided that you didn't need to know any of this story. And even though it is largely widely understood around the world today, your government still believes that you don't need to understand this story. The virus spread around the world. It killed a couple of million of our fellow Americans. It killed several million people around the world. It's a very, very bad story, and I want to argue that none of what I've just told you about that story is the worst aspect even of that story. So I want you to put a pin in that and hang on to that thought just for a minute. Because it turns out to also be true that money was taken from you and from your neighbors, from others around Iowa, from around the United States, again, forcibly. It was mixed with money taken from other people by other governments. Again, it was mixed, put through a shell corporation, the name of which that you don't know, and invested abroad in a way that your government doesn't want you to understand. It was used for the single purpose of exploding a pipeline at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. That's a weird story already, but let me continue. In my day, which is to say when I was a Republican 30 or 40 years ago, we would have considered this to be an act of war, and strangely, perhaps ironically, it would have been considered an act of war against the people of Germany. If you listen to what the White House objectives are, ironically, although it cost the people of Germany tens of billions of dollars, and although it cost tens of billions of dollars in repair costs to the multinational corporation that put the pipeline there in the first place, ironically, it will, over time, and already, I believe, increase the flow of petrodollars to the government of the nation of Russia, which is somewhat strange. Think about the cost that the German people are going to bear over the next few years, the costs that have already been incurred, what it has done to our reputation, the reputation of other players involved. It's a very bad story, and again, I want to ask you to put a pin in that story because nothing I've told you about that story is the worst aspect of it either. Also turns out to be true that a couple of weeks ago, a young man working for the Air Force decided he had no choice but to either risk going to jail or allow certain secrets to be kept by the American government that he found intolerable. If you were to listen to nothing but the CNN description of what was released, you don't have to listen to Fox News, you don't have to listen to the Republican Party, just listening to the mouthpiece of the Democratic Party, the party in power in the White House. CNN describes this information as revealing that your money, again, taken from you forcibly and invested abroad, again, against your will, in the nation of Ukraine is not giving you a good return on your money. It probably, in the long run, will not do the people of Ukraine any good. This is the information that the White House did not want to have released. Now, consider just for a moment, even the CNN description, this is information that the people of Ukraine already understand. The government of Ukraine is well aware of what's going on in Ukraine. The people who run the government of Russia, arguably one of the few governments on the planet that make our government actually look smart, even the people in the government of Russia are already familiar with this information, already know what's going on over there. So exactly who is it that our government didn't want to know about this? You, me. And as bad as that story is, put a pin in that, because I want to argue that the worst parts of that story I haven't mentioned either. These stories that seemingly have absolutely nothing to do with each other, the worst parts of them is that they have everything to do with each other. That yours is a government that operates in the shadows. Yours is a government that operates in the shadows because yours is a government that does not operate in your interests, does not operate in the interests of your fellow citizens. It operates in the interests of itself, to bring power to itself, for the power and the aggrandizement and the benefit of the politicians who run it. And if we don't do something about it, this government, of allegedly yours, will continue on the same path as it has for decades, some might argue for centuries. This is the worst aspect of these stories, that it's getting worse, not better. That it's going in a particular direction, it's going toward authoritarianism, in a way that we would have considered impossible a few decades ago. But indeed, it is not impossible in the United States. That is actually the direction we're going. We thought that this was a phenomenon that was reserved for certain nations in Latin America, certainly, Asia, possibly. Europe, maybe, maybe not. But it's happening here in the United States. And it's not because of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. It's because of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. I know everyone in here is a Tucker Carlson fan. I'm sure of that, right? Everyone's watched his, that was a laugh line, but hey, I really lead the audience here, don't you? I was one of the 18, probably 19 million people now that watched Tucker's video the other day. The one that said, life is better once you get fired, which is, I think, what we all say when we get fired. Tucker made the point that America is looking more and more like a one-party state. Say what you will about Tucker's IQ, I think he got this one right. We're moving in a particular direction. It has become fashionable, of course, in the entirety of my lifetime, but I believe increasingly so. It has become fashionable. We were just talking about this with the modern-day financier, Mr. Morris, at the luncheon table. We were talking about the fact that it has become fashionable for people to characterize each successive election as the most important in our lifetime. I would like to argue that elections have become decreasingly important, increasingly unimportant. Indeed, I do believe that the most recent elections have been the least important in my lifetime. Do we actually discern a difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party at this point? Neither party pursues an agenda reflective of what it used to be, right? Republicans aren't fiscally conservative anymore. Democrats are not socially liberal anymore. In this sense, if you were to listen to Gary Johnson's characterization of his campaign 5 and 6 years ago and 10 years ago, where he said he was fiscally conservative like a Republican and socially liberal like a Democrat, he was lying to those people, right? Because Republicans aren't that, and Democrats aren't that, and we aren't like that. To the extent to which we are socially liberal, we don't run around canceling each other because we don't agree with each other. We just punch each other in the face and go have lunch, because that's how we do things around here. The Republicans haven't run a fiscal conservative candidate for president, I would argue, since 1936, unless you want to say 1984. I can tell, looking around the room, most of you don't remember 1984. But the history books say that Ronald Reagan was fiscally conservative, but that's totally a relative term for that decade. The point being that this is going to continue to go unabated unless someone like us steps into the breach and does something about it. Consider, does anyone in this room really believe that the Democrat will stand up for your First Amendment rights? The Democrat will stand up for your Second Amendment rights, your Fourth Amendment rights. I'm fairly certain the Democrats that I know couldn't spell 10th Amendment. So I don't think that's going to happen. Is a Republican going to stand up and say to people around the world that the idea of taking money forcibly and using it to spread military hegemony is evil? No. That's for us to say. And if we don't say it, it won't get said. We, libertarians, we are the philosophical descendants of the people that put this nation together, that assembled our Declaration of Independence, that assembled our Constitution. Say what you will about it, it's the best thing that we have going on this particular planet. If we don't stand up for it, nobody else will. Look around the room, how many people do we have? 30. Fantastic. Multiply that by 50 for all of the conventions going around the United States that are just like yours. Not all of them as insane as you are, to be fair. Even that is not a large number. The implication is fairly clear. It's time for each one of us to pick up a shovel. And I don't mean a small one, the kind that you can wield. Not the kind of shovel that we used to use to dig our own graves. It's time for us to do something about it. And each of us is going to have to figure out what that means in his or her own way. But I do believe that our party apparatus, by that I mean the single-party duopoly apparatus that is leading the government of the United States, will continue in this particular direction unless and until the Libertarian Party fields a campaign that will stand up for our raw, unabated, absolutely unapologetic principles, that leads with that and backs it up with a campaign of credibility and, to be perfectly blunt, with the guts to rub the noses of the politicians in their own bullshit. If we don't do it, nobody else will. Chase and I spent a lot of time going around the United States talking about the opportunity that we have in 2024, and we all know why we have such a big opportunity. Republicans and Democrats each have leadership that stinks, to be honest. Republicans are frustrated with their party, Democrats as well. People that are not affiliated with either party are more open to the idea of a third party than ever before. We all understand what the opportunity is all about. Growing authoritarianism, after all, does play into our wheelhouse. But it's getting pretty boring talking about the opportunity that we have in 2024 because we've had opportunities in the past. I believe that the opportunity time is well behind us. We are rapidly approaching a point of no return. Certainly, the path that we're on implies that well before the end of this century, the fiscal status of the United States government will be one of bankruptcy. My greatest fear is not that that will happen. My greatest fear is that we won't care, that we won't even consider that such a bad thing by the time it does happen. And I think that that's a shame. You can say what you will about the American government, and there's nothing you can say about it that's worse than what I would say about it. It is the best thing that we have going in terms of holding up as an example the direction in which we want to go. We need to get back to the Constitution, and we need to go a hell of a lot further. No question about that. As I mentioned, I am not your charm and good looks candidate. I believe it is not our job to find common ground with Republican and Democratic politicians. It is our job to find common ground with Republican and Democratic voters. But this means that we must cleave a hard edge against Republicans and an even harder edge against Democrats. And that means hurting some feelings. When it comes to hurting people's feelings, I'm a professional. I work as an economist. Thanks. As long as my wife doesn't watch this, I think everything is going to be fine. I spent a couple of decades in my first career in public service and public policy as an economist, before teaching economics at a couple of universities and having my own business, educating financial services professionals, and before that, working as a free market advocate in the banking industry. I spent a couple of years working for the White House. I understand how the Office of Management and Budget works. I understand what curtailing spending looks like. I know how to do that. But when I talk about it with people I know in Washington, it does hurt some feelings. There's no question about that. I hurt a lot of feelings when I talk about monetary policy, because there's a difference between the way we all talk about changing monetary policy and when libertarians say we need to end the Fed. The reason this is the sort of thing that hurts people's feelings is because the Federal Reserve System is an organization that believes in itself. In that sense, it's much like the rest of Washington. I've worked with Federal Reserve economists all of my life. I've had my research on the banking industry personally referenced in public by the Fed chairman. I've met with the Fed board in the boardroom itself. I've had my writings published about electronic currency way back when it was getting started. I'm not going to tell you what year that was because I think it would embarrass me and you, but it's been a long time coming. So when I say that we need to eliminate all of the functions of the Federal Reserve System, it's not because I don't have respect for the people who have made an effort to make that system work. It's just the truth is it's a 100-year experiment that has proven, if nothing else, it can't work. Similarly, I hurt a lot of feelings when I talk about criminal justice reform and how we need fundamental institutional level changes in how we manage police officers. That's because I have a lot of friends who are still cops. My second career was as a police officer. I was on the road for 11 and a half years in South Broward County, one of the most extraordinarily high crime and population density places in the United States. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of public service. It's a lot of love also. You do fall in love with your community. You do take it seriously when crime is committed in your area. And trust me when I say, you do take it seriously when police officers misbehave. I believe that we need to bring market forces to bear on the industry of policing. I know how to get that done. But it doesn't sound any more palatable to police officers than school choice sounds to teachers. It's going to be a lot of work. I think you all understand that as well as I do. We were just speaking a moment ago about the fact that when you get together libertarians, you get together with a lot of people that work hard. If you were a sissy, you wouldn't be here today. Am I right about that? There are only people in this room that work hard. And so I know that you know what I mean when I say this isn't merely an opportunity in 2024. that it's not about me, it's not about you, it's not about other people in this room. It's about people elsewhere in the United States whom we call brothers and sisters for no other reason than the fact that they are fellow Americans. The people who are least able to stand up to our federal government. The people who are least able to afford Social Security taken out of their paychecks. The people who are most directly affected by an insanely counterproductive war on drugs. The kinds of families that are destroyed by the world's most criminal justice system. This is not merely an opportunity, this is our call of duty. Thank you. Thank you very much. We agreed to take a few questions, but we do have one rule that we agreed on last night, and that is only strange questions. No normal questions. I will be the final arbiter of what a strange question is. Yes, ma'am, you don't look strange, but I'll give you a shot.
Well, you cannot bind a third party for your agreement.
Yeah.
So I've
heard.
Yeah, I was not part of that agreement. So could you please tell us a little more about your background?
Sure, and with apologies for the rest of you listening, you're not going to get this 4 minutes back. Let this be the worst 4 minutes of your day. I grew up outside of Chicago, so I've been to Iowa before. That's the good news. Yeah, I spent more time in Illinois and Wisconsin than Iowa, but this is one of those places where I was as a kid and have fond memories of it. And I do believe that Iowa is one of those states, although I will give you, Jules, the opportunity to talk me out of this. I do believe that Iowa is probably one of those places on which we could afford to dedicate more time and money and resources in general in a general election, not only for major party status, and by that I mean lowercase m, lowercase p, lowercase s, with all due respect, not only to earn major party status, but because I do like the idea of making a punch-through impact in a couple of states. And I believe that Iowa could be such a state. To the extent to which Republicans don't spend enough time and energy on it because they think it's already in the bag for them, and Republicans similarly for the opposite reason, I think that we could do something here that would really be dramatic and a lot of fun. But having said that, I grew up in the banking industry. I came to libertarianism from the right-hand side. I believed that the world would be made a better place if it were run more efficiently. Having grown up in the banking industry, I went to graduate school in Washington, D.C., because, of course, anyone who wants to make the world a better place moves to Washington, right? That is how it works. Thank God you recognize that as a laugh line. Washington was a good experience for me, so I don't resent being in Washington for 15 years. You do learn a lot about how the government works, but you do learn how to tolerate disappointment as well. The White House that I worked for was under George Herbert Walker Bush, and I subsequently campaigned for him in 1992. Despite the fact that I was in the White House Office of Management and Budget when he went back on his pledge of no new taxes. This was a very dramatic moment if you were a young, arguably dumb economist, in those days. You really believed the Republican Party wanted to be fiscally conservative. I mean, why wouldn't you believe it, right? That's what people said. It just turned out to be not to be true. In the mid-90s, a buddy of mine who was a libertarian, I think he was at the time a registered libertarian. Interestingly, today he's a registered Republican. At the time, he told me, "You're not a Republican, you're a libertarian." And I said, "I don't say mean things to you, why would you say such a horrible thing to me?" But I resisted. I did not join the Libertarian Party for another decade. I joined the Libertarian Party when I was done being an economist, and I came to libertarianism at that point from the left side, or what I would characterize as the left side. We could argue about what that actually means. But I do believe there are two paths to libertarianism. One is the belief that the world is a better place when it's run more efficiently, and that efficiency means everyone ought to be making their own decisions. It's very much an Austrian economist type of approach. But there is a second approach, and that says that even if the world didn't work that way, suppose for a moment that socialism worked, That's a weird thing to say at a podium at the Iowa convention of the Libertarian Party. Suppose for a moment that socialism works. We know as an empirical matter that it doesn't, and which is, you know, it's really hard for an economist to debate with a communist or a socialist. I have had a couple of opportunities now in the last few weeks, which is also very, very strange. It's difficult to debate because you feel like you're just having a factual debate at this. You know, if this were the 1930s, at least we're having an argument that we haven't really seen what works. But in the year 2023, if you still think that socialism works, there is honestly something wrong with you. It's just you have willed yourself to believe something that is empirically proven to be false. But imagine if socialism worked. Would the government have the right to make decisions for you? In other words, don't we have the right to make decisions for ourselves, even if they're stupid decisions? Yes, yes, we do. And that's what I characterize as coming to libertarianism from the left-hand side, meaning that we have the right to live our lives by our own standards, whatever that might mean. And therefore, I do think it's extremely important that as libertarian representatives, certainly if someone aspires to be a politician, which is another very strange sentence, if someone aspires to represent libertarianism in a public policy sense, I think it's extremely important that we don't get involved in the culture wars. I very much appreciated what Shay said about that earlier. The one thing that needs to be said that hasn't is that when the culture wars start to touch public policy, that's when we need to stand up. That's where we need to draw the line. We can't have culture wars being legislated, right? There's no such thing as neutrality at that point. We need to draw a bright line in the sand against that. So it's extremely important that we be very careful, I believe, about talking about how we even feel about even our own opinions about lifestyles. Again, it's a weird thing because we're used to expressing our opinion about everything, right? Look, I was raised by a Lutheran and a Calvinist. I'm pretty sure that nobody wants my family's opinion about how you should live your life. I don't want my family's opinion about how I should live my life, right? But hey, that's Iowa, right? And it's Wisconsin, that's Illinois, and I'm very grateful for the background that my family had with which to raise me. I'm also grateful when they back away from the dinner table because it's going to get real in here if you people don't shut up. You know, we need to take that very seriously. That's probably too much about me. Is there another weird question? Yeah, Major.
What was your PhD thesis?
What was my PhD in?
Thesis, yeah.
Oh, the thesis. It was in economics, of course. It was in financial market development. So I did a cross-border analysis of the development of stock markets, which was a lot harder in 1990, 89, 90, 91 than it would be today because the big issue is getting the data. You know, there's a lot of keyboarding work. So I had data from 40-something different nation stock markets, anywhere from 5 years of data to 25 years of data, and regress that on the structure of the underlying economy, how concentrated it was, and there were certain rating agencies that existed even back then that talked about the regulatory environment. So there are certain regulatory aspects of a stock market that are beneficial. When stock market participants come together and make their rules, it's very advantageous. But too much regulation is a problem.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah. Sorry, this one's obligatory. I'm going to get grief for this.
Yeah, you are.
You mentioned
In both directions.
You mentioned.
I'm sorry, is your first name taxation or is your first name theft? Okay, Mr. Theft.
What are your views? You mentioned digital currency, cryptocurrency being experienced in that, and the growing Bitcoin cryptocurrency community trying to create digital hard money and libertarian. Where do you see that intersection?
I do, for a couple of different reasons, I do believe the Libertarian Party needs to be all in on supporting the development of extra currencies. But let me talk about this from the perspective of competition, which is really what I think that we need to foster. We need to be in the business of preventing. We need to be in the business of sunsetting the Fed altogether. But the fourth reason, in addition to regulation, bailouts, and monetary policy, the fourth reason we need to get rid of the Fed is because they're in the process already of creating a competitive currency, right? Something that would compete with other digital currencies, which is a huge problem. It's a huge problem not just because they're going to be able to track everything you do, which now that you and I are looking at each other, that's a weird thing. I don't think I want to know everything you do with your money, and you certainly don't want to know everything I do with my money. And we certainly don't want... Clyde's laughing. He must know some of the things you already do with your money. As important as that is, and look, you and I have finished this discussion already. We could end right here. But let me, at the risk of beating a dead horse, it's not merely the privacy issues, right? It's real important that the Fed not compete because we don't yet know how those markets are going to develop and play out. But we do know that they're going to be important. In other words, if we were talking about something that's relatively unimportant, you know, I might say this is issue 511 and I've only got bandwidth for 218, so who cares? No. We are going to hit an inflection point in the next few years in terms of smart contracting. It's going to change our economy. It's going to change our economy profoundly and broadly. That means a lot of transactions are going to run on blockchain technology. There's going to have to be currency that is supported by those technologies and which support those contracts. You do not want the Fed either preordaining what the characteristics are going to be of that currency that does that, or having a window into those transactions. Both of those are, again, back to the coming from the right or coming from the left, whichever way you come at this, you can't have the Fed doing that. So for this reason, I think it's real important. I do not believe it's very likely that the US dollar is going to lose its dominant, hegemonic reserve currency status anytime soon. Reserve currency status is actually a sibling to major party status. Your sister reserve currency. So it's not that I'm afraid that the U.S. government is going to lose all this revenue it doesn't deserve. Again, a weird thing to say at a Libertarian convention. I'm not really afraid they're going to lose all this revenue that it doesn't deserve, but I am afraid that technologically speaking, what could really be a wonderful thing is only going to be half wonderful because the Fed is going to screw it up. That's what I worry about. It's not that I think that we should be doing something to advance in a particular direction. We need to let it advance as it's going to. And of all the things we know about the federal government, its ability to direct an appropriate technological direction in any particular industry is absolutely nil. The same thing for AI. As fearful as some of us are about AI, and some of us are, as worried as you might be about AI, and there are reasons to be concerned, there are reasons to think about the role of AI in our future. The great bulk of what AI is going to do is going to be fantastic for our standard of living. But even to the extent to which you thought, oh boy, this is now I'm worried. Even if you're a worrier, and sometimes I mean we all worry, right? Even if you're a worrier, the solution is not the Fed. You're telling me the federal government is going to be the solution to your concerns about AI. Like, in what world do those dots connect? You know, they screwed up Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which is why we have the problems that we do today with the social media platforms. So, and haven't been able to fix that. And that was 27 years ago in 1996. Haven't been able to fix that. If you can't make decent rules for social media companies, you're telling me that we should let you make rules for AI? You know, that's just a disconnect. One more weird question, but it's got to be weird though. Sir?
Not that weird, but I asked Chase, so to be fair.
To be fair.
I understand the argument for incremental.
And to be fair, Chase isn't even in the room, so I'll say this behind his back. Chase is a good guy. I mean, he really is a nice guy, and he's a smart guy. I'm a big Chase fan, actually. Don't be picking on Chase, okay? If you got a weird-ass question and you want to bother somebody, you bring it to me, okay? You be nice to Chase.
I understand the argument for incremental change, but do you at least acknowledge philosophically that taxation is extortion like that?
Not only, the answer to that is obviously yes.
All right.
However, having said that, I think that there is a distinction to be made. If there is a difference between me and Chase, it's the following. I don't believe that we should lead with incrementalism. I think that the reason, let me start with the end of the story, and I'll pick up the pace. In my view, the reason, and I'm a Gary Johnson fan, I think he's a nice fellow. But having said that, the reason the Gary Johnson campaign imploded was not because he forgot the name of a town in Syria. It's just not. The reason his campaign imploded is because when he forgot the name of a town in Syria, he had not given his supporters a reason to stay with him. Contrast that with Donald Trump, of whom I'm no fan. That's not a laugh line, okay? I was in New York in the 80s. I got plenty of background and reason not to be a fan of Donald J. Trump. However, I'm not sure he was wrong when he said I could probably go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody without losing a great deal of support. I'm not sure he was wrong about that. That doesn't make him a good guy, right? But I'm going to go out on a limb and assert shooting on someone on Fifth Avenue is worse than forgetting the name of a city in Syria. I'm just going to make that assertion, okay? To the extent to which he might be right, and he has done some bad things, by the FYI, parenthetically, let's not forget, he has done some stupid things, really stupid things, and we can all argue about were they more stupid or were they more evil? I'll let you have that conversation yourself, but he's done some really bad things. He has not lost all of his support. He has hung on to an enormous proportion of his support. I'm not suggesting we run a campaign to make ourselves look like Donald Trump, okay? Don't mishear me. But there are lessons to be learned there. We need to be in the business of giving people a reason to hang on to us, to find us. It is true that most Americans have a libertarian leaning, but they need to find us. That means that we need to hold up a flag high, and it has to be the kind of flag that you can find. It can't any longer be true that you can't touch Social Security. The idea of putting youngsters into a defined benefit program, guaranteed to give them a crappy return over the course of their lifetime, that's evil. That needs to be said. We need to be the party that says, we're anti-war. We're against war. Period. Full stop. Let me explain why Ukraine's a bad idea. Let me explain why our Taiwan policy has been a bad idea. Let me explain why the things that we're doing are moving us closer, not further, from World War III. We need to say all those things. And yes, we need to say that taxation is extortion. It is a form of theft. All we're arguing about is how much of that you're going to put up with. We need to sunset the IRS because the relationship between us and the federal government in a taxation sense is completely inappropriate. We need to be the ones to say that. So, after that said, you can talk about why. Incrementalism in terms of how we're going to get there. How I'm going to hold your hand to explain it. What steps we're going to take. The fact that this is an intergenerational battle that we're undertaking. But you don't lead with the incrementalism, if that makes sense. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thanks very much.